Money shouts, but wealth whispers. Preston Holloway, a man whose ego took up more space than his private jet, was about to learn the difference the hard way. He stood in the aisle of Flight 808, screaming at a woman he assumed was the help, demanding she be removed from his sight. He waved his platinum status like a weapon, mocking her hair, her skin, and her presence in first class. He thought he was untouchable. He didn't realize that the woman he was abusing wasn't just a passenger. She was the one who signed his frequent flyer checks. This is the story of how one man's arrogance grounded him for life. The air inside the exclusive first-class lounge at JFK International Airport was always cool, scented faintly of white tea and old leather. It was a sanctuary for the elite, a place where the noise of the general terminal dared not intrude. For Naomi Stratton, however, it was simply a quiet place to finish her doctoral thesis review before the long flight to London. Naomi sat in a secluded corner, draped in an oversized, cream-colored cashmere sweater and simple leggings. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, natural bun, and she wore zero makeup. On her feet were comfortable sneakers, not the Louboutins usually seen clicking across the marble floors of the lounge. To the untrained eye, she looked young, perhaps a student who had gotten lucky with an upgrade, or maybe a nanny traveling with a wealthy family. She sipped her sparkling water, eyes scanning the digital pages on her tablet. The peace was shattered by a voice that boomed across the quiet room like a dropped tray of glass. "I don't care what the system says. I want the seat verified now. Do you know who I am?" Naomi didn't look up, but she felt the tension in the room spike. The staff at the concierge desk, usually unflappable, looked visibly strained. The man shouting was tall, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than most cars, with a gold watch that glinted aggressively under the recessed lighting. This was Preston Holloway, a mid-level hedge fund manager who had recently come into a significant amount of money and wanted everyone to know it. He moved through the world with the chaotic energy of a man who believed his bank balance was a substitute for a personality. "Mr. Holloway," the concierge said, her voice trembling slightly, "we have confirmed your seat. 1A is occupied, but 1B is available and is equally—" "I don't do 1B, Preston sneered, slapping his hand on the marble counter. "I requested 1A. It's the bulkhead window. It's where I sit." "Who is in 1A? Move them." "I'm afraid the passenger in 1A checked in hours ago, sir. We cannot move a passenger who has already been seated in the system without their consent." Preston laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Everyone has a price, or a boss. Just tell me who it is. Probably some upgrade nobody using miles. I'm a full-fare paying Diamond Elite member. That should mean something to this incompetent airline." Naomi turned a page on her tablet, her face impassive. She knew the policy better than anyone. Stratton International Airways prided itself on treating every first-class passenger with equal reverence, regardless of whether they paid full fare or used points. It was a rule her grandfather, Cyrus Stratton, had written into the company bylaws in 1968. Preston turned away from the desk, his face flushed with irritation. He scanned the lounge, looking for an audience for his outrage. His eyes landed on Naomi. She felt his gaze predatory and dismissive rake over her casual attire. He marched over to the buffet near her, grabbing a crystal tumbler of scotch. He turned to a man in a suit standing nearby, an associate he was traveling with, a quieter man named David. "Look at this place, David," Preston said loudly, ensuring his voice carried to Naomi's corner. "Used to be exclusive. Now? They let anyone in. Standards are slipping. It's like a Greyhound bus station in here." David looked uncomfortable. "Keep it down, Preston." "It's fine." "It's not fine," Preston hissed, gesturing vaguely in Naomi's direction with his glass. "You got people in here dressed like they're going to the gym. It devalues the product. I pay $20,000 for a ticket. I don't want to look at sweatpants." Naomi paused. She slowly lowered her tablet. The insult was indirect, but the target was obvious. She took a breath. Her father, Richard Stratton, the current CEO, always told her, "Never engage with a customer when you're angry. Listen, assess, then execute." She took a sip of water and went back to reading. "She doesn't even have the decency to look embarrassed," Preston muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Probably an employee using a guest pass. Diversity hire, no doubt." The air in the lounge seemed to freeze. Several other passengers looked up, shock registering on their faces. The racial undertone was not subtle. It was a sledgehammer. Naomi's fingers tightened on the edge of her tablet. She was a double PhD candidate in aeronautical engineering and international law. She sat on the board of 3 charities. She was the heiress to the Stratton fortune. And yet, to this man, she was just a diversity hire because of her skin color and her sneakers. She stood up. She didn't approach him. She simply gathered her things, walked past him with the grace of a queen, and headed for the boarding gate. As she passed, Preston snorted. "Finally," he said. "The help is clearing out." Naomi didn't stop. She didn't look back. But as she walked toward the gate, she pulled her phone from her pocket and sent a single text message to the director of in-flight services. "Passenger Preston Holloway. Seat 1B. Monitor closely. Do not intervene unless safety is compromised. I want to see how far he goes." The reply came 3 seconds later. "Understood, Miss Stratton. Captain Miller is flying today. Should we alert him?" "Not yet," Naomi typed. "Let him dig his hole." The walk down the jet bridge was usually a transition period, a time to leave the chaos of the ground behind. For Naomi, it was a moment of preparation. She knew Preston Holloway was behind her. She could hear his booming voice complaining about the temperature of the tunnel. She boarded the aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the jewel of the Stratton fleet. The chief purser, a woman named Elena who had known Naomi since she was a child, stood at the door. Elena's eyes widened slightly when she saw Naomi, and she opened her mouth to greet her by name. Naomi offered a barely perceptible shake of her head, and a finger pressed briefly to her lips. Elena, a professional to her core, adjusted instantly. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," Elena said smoothly, checking the boarding pass Naomi offered. "Seat 1A. Right this way." Naomi settled into 1A. It was a suite, really enclosed by sliding privacy doors, with a lie-flat bed, a massive entertainment screen, and a personal wardrobe. She placed her bag in the overhead bin and sat down, taking out her noise-canceling headphones. Moments later, the hurricane arrived. Preston Holloway stomped onto the plane, followed by the apologetic David. Preston shoved his boarding pass at Elena. "1B, he grunted. "And get me a scotch." "Neat. Before we take off." "Certainly, sir," Elena said, her smile tight. "Let me show you to your suite." Preston followed her, but he stopped dead in the aisle when he saw 1A. The partition was down, and he saw Naomi sitting there, calmly buckling her seatbelt. The color rose in Preston's neck. It started as a blotchy red and deepened to a vein-popping purple. "You've got to be joking," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. Elena paused. "Is there a problem, sir?" "You bet your ass there's a problem." Preston pointed a thick finger at Naomi. "That person is in my seat. I told the desk I wanted 1A, and aside from that, I am not sitting next to her." Naomi removed her headphones slowly. She turned her head, meeting his gaze with cool, dark eyes. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Preston snapped. "How did you even get on this flight? Staff travel is supposed to be in the back. Or did you sneak up here when the crew wasn't looking?" "I have a ticket, sir," Naomi said, her voice calm, devoid of the anger that was boiling in her gut. "Just like you." "Like me?" Preston laughed, looking around at the other first-class passengers who were now settling in and watching the drama unfold. "You are nothing like me. Look at you. You look like you just came from a rap concert. This is first class. It's for professionals, business leaders, not whatever this is." "Sir." Elena stepped in, her voice firm. "Miss Stratton, excuse me. The passenger in 1A is a ticketed customer. Please take your seat in 1B so we can complete boarding." "I demand you move her," Preston barked, turning on Elena. "I am a Diamond Elite member. I spend $500,000 a year on corporate travel. If I say I'm uncomfortable, you move the problem. She smells like cheap oil. It's offensive." The cabin went silent. The insult was so visceral, so blatantly racist, that even David, Preston's associate, looked horrified. "Preston, stop," David whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a point." Preston shook him off. He leaned over Naomi's suite wall, invading her personal space. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I don't know who you slept with to get this upgrade, but you don't belong here. Why don't you be a good girl, grab your little bag, and go find a middle seat in economy where you fit in?" Naomi didn't flinch. She looked at his face, memorizing the pores, the sweat on his upper lip, the hatred in his eyes. "I am comfortable where I am," Naomi said. "And I suggest you sit down. The doors are about to close." Preston looked like he was about to strike her. His hand twitched. For a second, the violence in the air was palpable. "Sir," a deep voice cut through the tension. Preston spun around. The co-pilot, First Officer Daniels, had stepped out of the cockpit, alerted by the commotion. He was a large man, ex-military. "Is there an issue here?" Daniels asked. Preston straightened his jacket, assuming a posture of aggrieved authority. "Yes, officer. This woman is harassing me. She's in my preferred seat, and she's being belligerent. I want her removed." Naomi almost smiled. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. First Officer Daniels looked at Naomi, then back at Preston. He knew exactly who Naomi was. He had flown her father the week before. But he saw the look in Naomi's eyes, the command to stand down. "The passenger manifest is correct, sir," Daniels said, his tone icy. "She is in 1A. You are in 1B. If you refuse to take your seat, I will have law enforcement escort you off the plane for delaying a federal flight. It is your choice." Preston's jaw worked furiously. He was cornered. He glared at Daniels, then at Naomi. "Fine," he spat. "Fine. But I am filing a formal complaint with the corporate office the second we land. I know Richard Stratton personally. We golf at the same club. When I tell him how his crew treated me, and the kind of riff-raff he's letting into his premium cabin, you'll all be looking for jobs." Naomi turned back to her window, hiding the smirk that threatened to break through. "You golf with Richard Stratton?" she thought. "Funny. My father hates golf. And he definitely doesn't know you." Preston slammed his body into seat 1B. He aggressively hit the call button. "Champagne," he yelled. "And make it the vintage stuff. I need to wash the taste of this place out of my mouth." Elena caught Naomi's eye as she passed with the bottle. Naomi gave a tiny nod. Let the games begin. The flight to London was 6 hours. Usually, after a meal service, the cabin lights would dim and passengers would sleep. But Preston Holloway had no intention of letting anyone sleep. 40 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin crew began the dinner service. The smell of roasted lamb and truffle mashed potatoes filled the cabin. Naomi had her tray table down, working on her laptop. She was typing an email to the legal department of Stratton International, requesting the file on Holloway's company, Vane Capital. She wanted to know every contract, every flight path, every dollar they spent with the airline. "Excuse me." Preston's voice rang out again. Elena appeared instantly. "Yes, Mr. Holloway? This wine?" He held up his glass. "It's corked. It tastes like vinegar. Do you people not know how to store a Bordeaux? I opened the bottle myself, sir. It is a 2015 Grand Cru. Perhaps your palate is?" "Don't lecture me on wine," Preston snapped. "Take it away. Bring me the scotch. And tell her," he jabbed a thumb toward the partition separating him from Naomi, "to stop typing so loudly. Click, click, click. It's giving me a migraine. Doesn't she know how to use a keyboard?" Naomi wasn't typing loudly. She was using a soft-touch keyboard designed for stealth. She ignored him and continued working. Preston unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He loomed over the partition. "Hey," he shouted down at her. Naomi stopped typing. She looked up. "Yes?" I said, "Stop it. You're disturbing the peace." "I am working," Naomi said. "Perhaps you should use the noise-canceling headphones provided." "I shouldn't have to wear headphones to drown out the noise of the ghetto," Preston sneered. The woman in seat 2A, an elderly British lady named Mrs. Higgins, gasped audibly. "Young man, that is quite enough," she said. "You are being absolutely dreadful." Preston spun on her. "Mind your own business, Grandma. This doesn't concern you." He turned back to Naomi. He saw the laptop screen. He squinted. "What is that?" he asked, mocking. "Filling out a welfare application? Or maybe writing a fan letter to a rapper?" Naomi closed the laptop slowly. "I am reviewing legal documents regarding contract law and corporate liability." Preston laughed so hard he choked on his own saliva. "Legal documents? You? Oh, that's rich. What, are you a paralegal? Did you get your degree online?" "Something like that," Naomi said. "Let me give you some advice," Preston said, leaning in closer, his breath smelling of stale alcohol. You can dress it up, you can buy the ticket, you can sit in the big seat, but you will never be one of us. You're an imposter. And everyone in this cabin knows it. You're just pollution. That was the line. Naomi saw Elena stepping forward, her face white with rage. Elena was about to intervene, protocol be damned. She was going to restrain him. But Naomi raised a hand. Wait. She needed him to hang himself completely. She needed him to be irrefutable. She needed the other passengers to be witnesses to a complete meltdown. Mr. Holloway, Naomi said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. I am going to ask you one time to sit down and stop speaking to me. If you continue, you will regret it. Preston's eyes narrowed. The alcohol was fueling his bravery. He felt challenged. His ego couldn't handle a woman, especially a black woman, speaking to him with authority. He grabbed his glass of scotch from his tray table. You don't tell me what to do, he hissed. And then, with a flick of his wrist, he threw the contents of the glass over the partition. The amber liquid splashed across Naomi's face, her cream sweater, and her open laptop. The cabin erupted. Mrs. Higgins screamed. David, the associate, buried his face in his hands. Elena and another flight attendant rushed forward. Sir, sit down. Now, Elena shouted, her voice commanding. Naomi sat frozen for a second. The cold liquid dripped from her chin. Her laptop screen flickered and went black. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She slowly wiped the scotch from her eyes. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, and when she stood to her full height, she looked down at Preston, who was suddenly realizing he might have gone too far. But he doubled down. Oops, he smirked. Slipped. Maybe now you'll go clean up in the back. Naomi looked at Elena. Elena, Naomi said. Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of a judge passing a death sentence. Please inform Captain Miller that we have a level 3 threat in the cabin. Assault on a passenger, damage to property, and inform him that the passenger he assaulted is Naomi Stratton. Preston froze. The name hung in the air like smoke. Stratton? He whispered. Like, the airline? Naomi didn't look at him. She looked at his terrified associate, David. David, is it? She asked. David nodded frantically. I suggest you move to seat 4A. You don't want to be near the splash zone for what happens next. Then, Naomi looked at Preston. She smiled. But it was a smile that promised ruin. You mentioned you know Richard Stratton? My father? Preston's face went the color of ash. Let's get him on the sat phone, Naomi said, reaching for the crew handset on the wall. I'm sure he'd love to hear how his golf buddy treats his daughter. The silence in the first-class cabin was heavier than the pressurized air outside. Preston Holloway stood panting, his chest heaving, his eyes darting between the amber stain on Naomi's sweater and the horrified faces of the other passengers. The smell of expensive scotch was pungent, sharp, and cloying. Naomi Stratton did not move. She did not wipe the liquid from her face. She simply stood there, a statue of judgment, holding the crew handset. Captain Miller, Naomi said into the phone, her voice calm but carrying a tremor of absolute authority. I need you in the cabin. Immediately. Preston laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. Oh, give it a rest. You're calling the pilot? What's he gonna do? Turn the plane around because you got a little wet? I'll pay for the dry cleaning. Here? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip, tossing a wad of $100 bills at her feet. Buy yourself a new outfit, something that actually fits in first class. The disrespect was so profound that Mrs. Higgins, the elderly woman in 2A, began to weep softly. The cockpit door burst open. Captain Miller did not walk. He marched. He was a man of 50, with salt and pepper hair and the stern demeanor of a man who had flown combat missions before he flew commercial. He saw the scene instantly. The scotch dripping from the partition, the bills scattered on the floor, and Naomi Stratton, the daughter of the man who signed his paychecks, the woman he had known since she was a teenager, standing wet and humiliated. What is going on here? Miller asked, his voice low and dangerous. Captain, Preston stepped forward, trying to regain control of the narrative. Thank God you're here. This woman is hysterical. She's been harassing me since takeoff. I had an accident with my drink turbulence, and she's blowing it out of proportion. She's threatening me. I want her moved to the back immediately. Captain Miller ignored Preston completely. He turned his body toward Naomi, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of respect that Preston missed entirely. "Miss Stratton," Miller said, his tone softening. "Are you injured? Did the glass hit you?" "I'm fine, Captain," Naomi said, handing him the handset. "Physically, at least. But Mr. Holloway here seems to believe that his platinum status grants him the right to assault passengers and spew racial epithets." "Lies!" Preston shouted. "She's lying. Do you know who I am? I run Vane Capital. I know your boss. I know Richard." "Stop," Captain Miller said. He held up a hand, palm out. "Mr. Holloway, you need to be quiet." "Don't you shush me," Preston poked Miller in the chest. The air in the cabin shifted. "You do not touch the captain." Miller grabbed Preston's wrist. He didn't twist it, but he held it with a grip like a vice. He lowered it slowly, forcefully, until Preston was forced to take a step back. "Mr. Holloway," Miller said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "you just assaulted a federal flight deck officer. That alone is a felony. But you seem to be laboring under a massive delusion regarding the passenger in 1A. "She's a nobody," Preston spat. "The passenger in 1A, Miller continued, articulating every syllable, is Naomi Stratton. She is a doctoral candidate at MIT. She is a board member of this airline. And she is the daughter of our CEO. The man you claim to golf with." Preston froze. His brain tried to process the information, but his ego blocked it. No, that's impossible. Look at her." "I am looking at her," Miller said. "I see a woman who has conducted herself with grace while you have acted like an animal." Naomi stepped forward. She looked down at the money on the floor. "Pick it up," she said. Preston blinked. "What?" "The money," Naomi said. "Pick it up. You threw it like trash. Pick it up." Preston looked at the captain. The captain's face was stone. He looked at David. David was staring out the window, pretending to be invisible. Slowly, painfully, Preston bent down. His knees cracked. He gathered the bills, his face burning with a humiliation so deep it felt like a sunburn. "Now," Naomi said, pulling a fresh tablet from her bag, her backup device. "You mentioned you know my father? You said you golfed together." I mean, we belong to the same circles," Preston stammered. "I may have embellished." "Slightly." "Let's ask him," Naomi said. She tapped the screen of the tablet. She initiated a video link via the aircraft's encrypted satellite Wi-Fi. It was a direct line, reserved for emergencies and executive communication. The screen lit up. A moment later, the face of the CEO appeared. He was sitting in his study in Connecticut, wearing reading glasses and a cardigan. He looked like a kind grandfather, until you saw his eyes. "Naomi?" The CEO's voice filled the cabin through the tablet's speakers. "Everything all right? You're mid-flight." "Hi, Dad," Naomi said. "I'm fine, but I have a friend of yours here. He says you're golf buddies. Preston Holloway?" Naomi turned the tablet so the camera faced Preston. Preston Holloway looked into the digital eyes of the billionaire tycoon he had spent years trying to emulate. The CEO squinted. "Who?" "Preston Holloway," Naomi repeated. "He's a Diamond Elite member. He says you know him." "I have never seen this man in my life," the CEO said flatly. Then he noticed the wet sweater. "Naomi, why are you wet? Is that alcohol?" "Mr. Holloway threw his scotch at me," Naomi said calmly. "Because he didn't like my hair, or my skin, or my seat assignment." The silence from the Connecticut study was long. When the CEO spoke again, his voice was no longer that of a father. It was the voice that had crushed unions and hostile takeovers in the 80 seconds. "Captain Miller," the CEO said. "Here, sir." Miller responded instantly. "Restrain that man. Zip ties. If he utters another sound, gag him. I will have the Port Authority waiting at Heathrow." "And Naomi?" "Yes, Dad?" "Bury him." The screen went black. Preston stood trembling. "Now, wait a minute. Let's not be hasty. It was a joke. A misunderstanding." "Sit down," Captain Miller barked. Two flight attendants appeared with heavy-duty plastic restraints. They forced Preston into seat 1B. They pulled his arms behind his back and zipped his wrists together. They strapped his chest to the seat with a seatbelt extension. "You can't do this," Preston screamed, thrashing. I'll sue this whole airline into the ground." "David," Naomi called out softly. The associate jumped. Yes, Miss Stratton?" I assume you have your phone? Yes. Did you record it? David hesitated. He looked at his boss, bound and foaming at the mouth. He looked at Naomi, cool and terrifying. He looked at his own future. Yes, David said. I recorded everything from the moment we boarded. Good, Naomi said. Airdrop it to me. And David? Yes? You just earned yourself an upgrade. Move to 1K on the other side. Enjoy the champagne. David scrambled out of his seat like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Preston watched him go, his eyes wide with betrayal. Traitor! Preston screamed. You're fired, David. You're fired. Actually, Naomi said, sitting back down in her wet clothes, opening a new file on her tablet. I don't think he is. But you, Mr. Holloway? You might want to update your LinkedIn. The remaining 4 hours of the flight were a study in contrast. On the left side of the cabin, in seat 1B, Preston Holloway sat trussed like a turkey. He had gone through the stages of grief quickly. First, he shouted threats. Then, he offered bribes $10,000 to Elena, the purser, to cut him loose. She didn't even blink. Then, he wept. Finally, he fell into a sullen, terrified silence, staring at the screen in front of him, which Elena had mercifully turned off. On the right side, in seat 1A, Naomi Stratton was waging war. She had changed into a pair of silk pajamas, provided by the airline, ironically, the very loungewear Preston had criticized earlier. She looked elegant, comfortable, and lethal. She had connected to the high-speed satellite internet. The first thing she did was pull the file on Vane Capital. It was a boutique firm, mid-sized. They managed assets for wealthy families and a few pension funds. Their reputation was built on aggressive growth and traditional values. Preston was the managing partner. Naomi began to type. Her fingers flew across the virtual keyboard. She drafted an email to the board of directors of Vane Capital. She attached the video file David had sent her. The video was clear. It showed the racial slurs. It showed the assault. It showed the moment Preston threw the drink. Subject line: immediate termination of Preston Holloway. Material breach of conduct. She didn't send it yet. She needed more leverage. She looked up the major investors of Vane Capital. One name stood out: the Kensington Trust. It was a massive British endowment fund that controlled 40% of Vane's liquidity. The head of the trust was Sir Arthur Pendleton, a man known for his rigid moral code and his hatred of public scandal. Naomi smiled. She knew Arthur. He sat on the board of the London Symphony Orchestra with her aunt. She composed a personal message to Sir Arthur. Dear Arthur, I hope you and Lady Pendleton are well. I am currently mid-flight to London on Stratton Flight 808. Unfortunately, I have been physically assaulted and racially abused by a man named Preston Holloway. He claims to manage your funds. I am attaching the video evidence. The police will be meeting the plane, but I thought you should know who is handling your money before the press gets hold of the mugshot. I would hate for the trust to be associated with this kind of behavior. Best, Naomi. She hit send. 10 minutes passed. The plane hummed along at 38,000 feet. Then, a notification pinged on her tablet, a reply from Sir Arthur. My dear Naomi, I am horrified. Are you safe? This is unacceptable. I am contacting Vane Capital immediately. We are pulling our entire portfolio effective this morning. The man is a disgrace. Give my regards to your father. Boom. 40% of Preston's company was gone. But Naomi wasn't done. She looked at Preston. He was wiggling, trying to loosen the zip ties. Mr. Holloway, she said. Her voice was conversational, as if asking about the weather. Preston looked at her, eyes red-rimmed. What do you want? You've had your fun. I just thought you should know, Naomi said, turning her screen so he could see it. The Kensington Trust just pulled their funding. All of it. Preston's face went slack. What? No. You can't. You can't talk to them. I just did, Naomi said. And I'm about to email the California State Bar Association. I see you're a licensed attorney as well as a fund manager. Moral turpitude is a serious offense, Preston, especially when there's video evidence of a hate crime. Please, Preston whispered. The fight was gone. Please, don't. That's my license. That's my life. You should have thought about that before you called me pollution, Naomi said. She sent the email to the Bar Association. And now, Naomi said, for the press. She logged into her private Twitter account. She didn't use it often, but she had a significant following due to her academic work and her family name. She didn't post the video publicly yet. That was for the police. Instead, she posted a simple text update. Sad to see that in 2024, racism and misogyny are still flying first class. Just was assaulted by a hedge fund manager on my own family's airline. Grateful for the amazing crew and Captain Miller for keeping me safe. Police are waiting in London. Stratton Airways, no room for hate. She didn't name him. She didn't have to. The internet loves a mystery. Within minutes, the tweet had 1,000 retweets. People were replying, asking for the name. Internet sleuths were tracking the flight number. "What are you doing?" Preston moaned. "I'm preparing your welcome party," Naomi said. She turned to Mrs. Higgins in 2A. The elderly woman was watching Naomi with a mixture of awe and fear. "I am so sorry for the disturbance, Mrs. Higgins," Naomi said warmly. "I hope you can manage to get some rest." "My dear," Mrs. Higgins said, reaching out a trembling hand, "you are a force of nature. I worked in the courts for 40 years. I have never seen a prosecution conducted so efficiently at 30,000 feet. Naomi smiled. "My grandfather always said, if you're going to clean house, do it thoroughly." Elena approached Naomi's suite. She held a silver tray with a fresh glass of sparkling water and a hot towel. "Miss Stratton," Elena whispered. "We are beginning our initial descent. Captain Miller has radioed Heathrow. The Metropolitan Police will board the aircraft before anyone deplanes." "Thank you, Elena," Naomi said. "Make sure David in 1K is looked after. He's going to be a key witness." "He's currently enjoying the lobster thermidor and writing a resignation letter," Elena smirked. The plane began to bank. The engines shifted pitch. The world outside the window was a blanket of clouds, but down below, the cold, hard reality of London was waiting. Preston Holloway was currently worth about $10 million. By the time the wheels touched the tarmac, he would be unemployable, under investigation, and on the verge of bankruptcy. He had started the flight as a predator. He was landing as prey. Naomi closed her eyes and leaned back. She hadn't even started her thesis review, but she felt she had accomplished something far more important today. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom. "We are starting our descent into London Heathrow. Please return your seats to the upright position. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. And to the passenger in 1B, remain exactly where you are." The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud, sounding like the gavel of a judge slamming down. The tires of the Boeing 787 kissed the runway at Heathrow with a jarring thud, followed by the roar of reverse thrusters. To most passengers, it was the sound of arrival. To Preston Holloway, it sounded like the slamming of a prison cell door. The aircraft taxied slowly toward Terminal 5. The cabin was deathly quiet. Usually, this was the moment when the first-class shuffle began, the click of seatbelts unbuckling, the rustle of bags, the impatient standing in the aisle. But today, nobody moved. The passengers in 2A, 2K, and the rest of the cabin remained seated, eyes fixed on the drama in the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Miller's voice crackled one last time. "We have arrived at the gate. Please remain seated, with your seatbelts fastened. We have authorities boarding the aircraft to deal with a security incident. Once they have cleared the cabin, we will commence disembarkation. Thank you for your patience. And for flying Stratton." The seatbelt sign did not turn off. Preston Holloway, still strapped into seat 1B with heavy-duty zip ties, looked out the window. He saw the jet bridge extending toward the plane like a mechanical arm. Below, on the tarmac, 2 police cruisers with blue lights flashing were parked next to the ground crew. "You can't do this," Preston whispered, his voice hoarse from shouting. "I'm an American citizen. I have rights. You can't just hand me over to foreign police." Naomi, who had packed her bag and was now sitting calmly with her hands folded in her lap, turned to him one last time. "Actually, Preston," she said, "the Tokyo Convention of 1963 grants the aircraft commander, Captain Miller, the authority to restrain any person who jeopardizes the safety of the flight and to deliver them to the competent authorities of the landing state. You are on British soil now, and British laws regarding hate speech and common assault are quite robust." The cabin door opened. The cool, damp air of London rushed in, mixing with the stale, pressurized air of the cabin. 3 officers from the Metropolitan Police Service boarded. They were not smiling. They wore high-visibility jackets over their black tactical vests. The lead officer, a tall sergeant with a shaved head, nodded to Elena at the door. "Where is he?" the sergeant asked. Elena pointed a manicured finger at 1B. "That gentleman there. Mr. Holloway." The officers marched down the aisle. Their heavy boots thudded on the carpet. They stopped at Preston's seat. "Preston Holloway?" the sergeant asked. "Yes, finally," Preston said, trying to sound authoritative despite being tied up. "Officer, these people have kidnapped me. I demand you arrest this woman and the pilot for false imprisonment." The sergeant ignored him. He looked at Captain Miller, who had emerged from the cockpit. "Captain, is this the individual who assaulted a passenger and threatened the safety of the aircraft?" "That is him," Miller said. "I have signed the formal complaint. Witness statements have been collected by my crew." "Thank you, Captain." The sergeant turned back to Preston. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Sir, I am arresting you on suspicion of racially aggravated assault and being drunk on an aircraft. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence." One of the constables cut the zip ties. Before Preston could even rub his sore wrists, the steel cuffs were snapped on. Click. Click. "This is a mistake," Preston yelled as they hauled him out of the seat. "I know people. I have a lawyer. I want to call the embassy." "You can make your calls at the station, sir," the sergeant said, shoving him toward the door. As Preston was frog-marched down the aisle, he passed Naomi. He stopped, digging his heels into the carpet, forcing the officers to pause. He looked at her. His eyes were wide, filled with a mix of hatred and terrifying realization. "You realized what you did?" he hissed. "You destroyed my life over a drink." Naomi stood up. She towered over him in the small space. She didn't shout. She didn't look angry. She looked pitying. "I didn't destroy your life, Preston," she said softly. "You did. I just held up the mirror." "Move it," the officer barked, shoving Preston forward. Preston stumbled onto the jet bridge. The last thing the first-class cabin heard was his voice echoing down the tunnel, screaming about lawsuits. When he was gone, the silence in the cabin broke. "Good riddance," Mrs. Higgins said loudly from seat 2A. "Dreadful little man." The sergeant remained behind for a moment. He turned to Naomi. "Miss Stratton?" "Yes, Sergeant?" "We will need a statement from you. But we understand you are we know who you are. We can take your statement in the VIP lounge if that is more comfortable." "That won't be necessary," Naomi said, picking up her bag. "I'll come to the station. I want everything done by the book. No special treatment. I want this conviction to stick." The sergeant smiled, a rare crack in his professional demeanor. "Understood, ma'am. If you'll follow me." As Naomi walked toward the door, Elena stopped her. She handed Naomi a piece of paper. "What is this?" Naomi asked. "David's contact info," Elena whispered with a wink. "He said he'd testify to whatever you need. He also left his resignation letter on the meal tray." Naomi chuckled. She walked off the plane, down the jet bridge, and into the terminal. As she entered the gate area, the Stratton Airways ground staff were waiting. They had been alerted. The station manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, rushed forward. "Miss Stratton, we heard what happened. Are you all right? Do you need a doctor? A car?" Naomi looked around. Passengers were staring. The police were escorting Preston away in the distance, people filming him with their phones as he was dragged through the terminal in handcuffs. "I'm fine, Mr. Henderson," Naomi said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "But do me a favor?" "Anything." "Flag Mr. Holloway's profile in the global system," she said. "Lifetime ban. On Stratton, on our partners, on anyone we have a code share with. I don't want him flying anything other than a kite for the rest of his life." "Consider it done," Henderson said. Naomi walked through the terminal, her head high. She had a thesis to finish, a board meeting to attend, and a police statement to give. But first, she was going to call her father and tell him that his golf buddy wouldn't be making tea time ever again. The fallout did not arrive in a whisper. It arrived with the violence of a thunderclap. For Preston Holloway, the descent from the pressurized luxury of the first-class cabin to the cold, sterile reality of a Heathrow holding cell was a shock to the system that no amount of scotch could numb. He spent the night on a hard concrete bench, his bespoke Italian suit wrinkling against the grime of the cell wall. The air here didn't smell of white tea and leather. It smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair. He was a man who had built his entire identity on access to the best lounges, the best tables, the best investments. But here, in the bowels of the London legal system, his platinum status meant nothing. When he demanded a phone call, the custody sergeant didn't look up from his paperwork. When he threatened to sue, the heavy steel door simply slammed shut, sealing him in with his own terrifying thoughts. He was charged with common assault, racially aggravated, and drunkenness on an aircraft. Because he was a flight risk with substantial assets, his passport was seized immediately. For the first time in 20 years, Preston Holloway was grounded. By the time he was released on bail the following morning, looking gray-faced and disheveled, the real trial had already concluded. The court of public opinion had convened while he was sleeping, and the verdict was unanimous. Preston stepped out of the station, shielding his eyes from the gray London morning, and turned on his phone. It vibrated so hard in his hand, it felt like it was having a seizure. Thousands of notifications flooded the screen. The video David had recorded had not just leaked, it had gone supernova. A passenger in row 3 had filmed David's phone screen while he replayed the incident for the crew, and that grainy, second-hand footage was now the #1 trending topic on X, TikTok, and Instagram. The title was simple and devastating. Hedge fund CEO attacks black woman on plane, doesn't realize she owns the airline. It had 14 million views and climbing. Preston stood on the sidewalk, scrolling with trembling fingers. He watched himself, his face twisted in a sneer, his hand throwing the drink, his voice spitting the word pollution. Then he saw the comments, tens of thousands of them. They weren't just criticizing him. They were dissecting him. They mocked his suit, his haircut, his insecurity, and his blatant racism. He wasn't just a villain, he was a laughingstock. Then came the professional execution. At 9 a.m., a notification popped up from the Financial Times. It was a breaking news alert. Vane Capital cuts ties with managing partner Preston Holloway following viral hate speech incident. He tried to log into his work email. Access denied. He tried to call his secretary. The line went straight to a generic voicemail. The locks had been changed, digitally and physically, before he had even posted bail. The Kensington Trust, the bedrock of his firm's liquidity, had pulled their massive 40% stake within an hour of Naomi's email to Sir Arthur. 3 other pension funds followed suit before the markets even opened. In the span of 12 hours, Preston hadn't just lost his job, he had become toxic radioactive waste. No reputable firm in London, New York, or Hong Kong would touch him. He was a pariah. 3 days later, the final act played out in the hushed, carpeted conference room of Slaughter and May, one of the most prestigious law firms in the world. The room was high up in a glass tower, overlooking the city, reminiscent of the view from the first-class cabin. But this time, Preston wasn't in the seat of power. He sat on the wrong side of the table, flanked by a court-appointed solicitor because his usual high-powered legal team had dropped him to avoid the PR contamination. Across the table sat Naomi Stratton. She looked immaculate. She wore a sharp navy blazer, and her hair was pulled back in the same elegant bun he had mocked days earlier. She didn't look angry. She looked entirely, terrifyingly at peace. "My client is prepared to offer a public apology," Preston's solicitor said, his voice weary. He knew he had a losing hand. "And a substantial financial settlement to avoid a civil trial for damages. Mr. Holloway is willing to liquidate certain assets to make this go away." Preston kept his eyes on the mahogany table. He couldn't bear to look at her. "I just want it over," he whispered. "I'll pay whatever you want." Naomi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "I don't want your money, Preston," Naomi said softly. Preston looked up, startled. "What?" "But that's how these things work. You sue, I pay, we sign NDAs. I have plenty of money," Naomi continued, her voice devoid of malice but filled with a steely resolve. "And I don't want an NDA. I want accountability." She slid a single, crisp document across the table. "This is a settlement agreement," she said. "I will drop the civil suit. But you will plead guilty to the criminal charges in the magistrate's court tomorrow. No plea deals, no fighting it. You take the conviction on your permanent record. Preston paled. That will ruin me. I'll be disbarred. I'll never work in finance again. You are already ruined, Naomi said cold-bloodedly. The world saw to that. This is just the paperwork. She tapped the document with a manicured finger. But there is one more condition. The only way I agree to let you walk out of that courtroom without pressing for a custodial sentence. Preston swallowed hard. Anything. You will use the remainder of your liquid assets after your legal fees and your divorce settlement to fund a specific charitable trust. A charity? Preston frowned. Which one? The Red Cross? The arts? No, Naomi said. You will fund the Holloway Diversity in Aviation Scholarship. It will pay for the flight training and university education of underprivileged minority women who want to become pilots or aeronautical engineers. Preston stared at her, his mouth falling open slightly. The irony hit him like a physical blow. She was forcing him, a man who had sneered at diversity hires, a man who believed the sky belonged to the white and wealthy, to personally finance the careers of the very women he despised. You can't be serious, he whispered. I am deadly serious, Naomi said. Every time a young black woman earns her wings at the Stratton Academy, the check will have your signature on it. You will spend the rest of your life lifting up the people you tried to push down. Preston looked at his solicitor. The man shrugged. It's the best deal you're going to get, Mr. Holloway. The alternative is prison. With a shaking hand, Preston Holloway picked up the pen. He felt the weight of his own ego collapsing in on itself. He signed his name. 6 months later, the main hangar of the Stratton Airways Flight Academy was filled with the scent of jet fuel and optimism. Behind the podium stood a gleaming, brand-new Boeing 787 Dreamliner, its fuselage polished to a mirror shine. In the audience sat 50 young women. They were black, Asian, Hispanic, and white. They came from inner cities and rural towns. They wore crisp, new flight suits, their eyes wide with the promise of the future. In the front row, Richard Stratton sat next to Captain Miller. Both men were beaming with pride. Naomi Stratton stood at the podium. She adjusted the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. When I was a little girl, Naomi began, her voice echoing through the vast hangar, my grandfather told me that the sky belongs to everyone. It doesn't care how much money you have, what color your skin is, or who your father is. Gravity treats us all the same. The laws of aerodynamics do not discriminate. She paused, her gaze drifting for a split second to the empty space where a VIP guest might usually sit. Recently, I was reminded that not everyone on the ground understands that, she continued. I met a man who thought his status gave him the right to look down on others. He thought the world belonged to him because he paid full fare. He thought he could buy class. A ripple of knowing laughter went through the crowd. Everyone knew the story. It had become a legend in the aviation world. But today, Naomi smiled, and it was a genuine, radiant smile. Because of that man's ignorance, 50 of you are sitting here. His arrogance became your opportunity. Every hour of flight time you log, every exam you pass, is a direct result of his contribution. And that, she said, raising a glass of sparkling water, is what I call a course correction. To the future, captains, she toasted. To the future, the room roared back. 50 voices rising in unison, drowning out the memory of Preston Holloway forever. As the applause thundered, Naomi walked off the stage. She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened LinkedIn. She had one last loose end to check. The algorithm, ever helpful, offered a suggestion. People you may know, Preston Holloway. She clicked on the profile. The photo was no longer a professional headshot. It was a gray placeholder avatar. The title of managing partner was gone. Current role: assistant manager at Car Wash Pro, New Jersey. Naomi let out a short, soft laugh. He was finally cleaning up something, even if it wasn't his act. She swiped left. Deleted. She slipped the phone into her pocket and walked out onto the tarmac, where the wind was blowing and the jets were screaming, ready to take flight. The air was clear, the sky was open, and for the first time in a long time, it felt perfectly, beautifully clean. And that is how the Platinum Predator became the sponsor of the very people he despised. Preston Holloway thought he was shouting at a servant, but he was actually auditioning for his own downfall. He lost his job, his reputation, and his fortune, proving that while you can buy a first-class seat, you cannot buy class. The next time you're on a plane, remember, be kind. You never know if the person you're insulting is the one who can ban you for life. If you enjoyed this story of supreme karma, please smash that like button. It helps us create more stories like this. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next saga. And tell me in the comments, do you think Preston's punishment was enough, or did he deserve jail time? I'll be reading your replies. Thanks for watching.